Right. So, hello and welcome everyone to this panel discussion with Space's Art and Technology Residency Artists and chaired by Lucy Sollit. My name is Kristina Pulekova, and I'm previously the Art and Technology Program Manager and now the digital producer at Space. And I'm very pleased to present this panel from within our very own virtual stage in Mozilla Hubs. The event is broadcasted live, so you will have the opportunity to address the speakers and add to what I think will be a very, very inspiring discussion. So the little avatar with the lemon green face you can see here is actually myself, and you will be experiencing this broadcast through my eyes into this virtual room. And here with me are some amazing artists as well as our chair, to present their work that they have been producing throughout the residency for the Art and Technology program here at Space. Tonight we have the artists who have currently an online showcase at Space's website. And this panel coincides with the Art and Tech online showcase titled Deep Play, featuring the following artists. Above and Below, which is a collaborative practice between artists Daria Jelonek and Perry James Sutton, Anna-Laure Schneider, who is one part of Collective Fact, and Cyril Rebetes, John Wilde, Libby Heaney, Mina Langstrom, Thomas Pellery Grogan, and Zoyander Street. Deep Play is an online group show by the Space's Art and Technology Residency Artists, looking at how the act of play can inspire the artistic processes. The work considers how gamification and gamified experiences can affect the environment, identities, and relationships towards ourselves and each other. Inspired by the theme of Deep Play, the artists were invited to think about world building, turning gamification upside down, and showing us how to subvert or better understand the rules of online gaming. Begun in 2019, prior to the pandemic, the artists' research has shifted in response to the current world we now find ourselves in. Through work documentation, 3D models, moving image, and interactive experiences, Deep Play offers an insight into the artist's processes and thoughts around the healing power of nature, toxic human-machine relationships, as well as body and gender identities. Audiences are invited to interact with an AI program, non-binary and trans characters, and examine micro and macro scales of nature through scientific photography and data. So tonight's panel will be chaired by curator, researcher, and consultant Lucy Sollit. Lucy focuses on cutting edge of artistic practice, especially the intersection of art and technology and possibilities for new artistic economies. Lucy is also a mentor for artists and creative practitioners on our London Creative Network program here at Space. And I am very excited to be having her here as chair of this panel. Before we start, I actually just like to say this is a completely new way of working online for us, and we would appreciate your patience and understanding if we encounter some technical difficulties throughout the event. Just to mention that artist Libby Heaney sadly couldn't join us tonight, as well as Cyril Rebetes, but please do check out the works as part of our online showcase. So throughout this event, I will be sharing, so Lanya and me will be sharing the link to the showcase that you can visit in the comments box in this YouTube stream. And I would like to ask you to please share with us your thoughts in the comment section, and at the end of this discussion, you would also be invited to share your questions with our participants live throughout this broadcast. So without further ado, I would like to give the mic over to Lucy. So Lucy, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
cognitive level, so on a personal level, we defined those 6 different layers. So the first one is from bottom up, is atmosphere space, where we, for example, found out that actually, yeah, this is where, for example, spaceships are, and which also already create pollution in this layer. But also our behavior on the planet down here actually already impacts this layer. Then we go down to atmosphere's Earth, the layer which is 10 kilometers above us, and layer that we all know because this is where weather patterns are taking place, and which, for example, through our technological impact are actually changing. So weather patterns are changing. Then we go down to atmosphere's nature, and we are questioning, can plants, for example, help us to reflect on those behaviors? Going down to atmosphere's data. This is where we got back to the data set that Perry described earlier. And what we're saying, for example, in this scene of this video essay is that, yeah, data can maybe help us to understand this impact, but it's not enough. Just seeing a data set is not changing our behavior. It's actually not like really touching us. So what we are saying is actually that we need experiences that bring this closer. We need discussions, and we need probably rituals that we maybe incorporate in the everyday to change our behaviors in a smaller way. Then we go down to atmosphere is technology, and where we're talking about how I'm just reading out this the scene, for example, the essay we wrote for this scene. Data cables are evaporating through our lungs, streaming, transferring, connecting. What if we colonize a new dialogue between streaming behaviors and resulting aerosols? And the last scene is atmosphere's cognition. That's more ending on a personal level. And summarized, this is like, this essay is really a starting point of a larger research that we conducted that is still ongoing, not finished. And it's really to think about the hidden complexities actually of our use of technology and how it, invisibly actually impacts the environment and creating. And we don't have all answers yet. And especially as artists working with technology, this is a huge challenge. For example, while we were creating this work, we were in lockdown and working from home, and we had a device which really reflected how much energy, for example, we consumed while we were creating renders. And I think that experience, for example, taught me actually I really should think about what I render. Like I first finish a scene, for example, before I really use all the computer power to use it, and those little things. And as I said, we don't have all the answers yet. However, it's important to create awareness of this, and we hope that small experiences and discussions can maybe make a difference. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Daria and Kerry. And I think we may have had a sound problem. Thank you. We may have had a sound problem in the initial part of your presentation. So it might be that when we're talking things through a bit more, we might want to come back over the atmospheric scene project that Perry was talking about. But I think and hope we caught most of what you were saying, Daria. So yeah,
all right.
Thank you very much for that. So for now, we'll move on to Annalore.
Yes, hello, thank you. Yes, as I'm an artist, as everyone said, I'm working with under the name Collective Art, and we usually make films and photographic work. When I heard about the Deeply residency, I was really interested about the theme of gamification of a life, and as I did work already on some interactive work in the past, and I started to have a lot of conversation with my partner about it, Cyril, who is a psychologist and UX researcher and been working at PlayStation for many years. And we talked a lot about behavioral design, psychology of attention, cognitive bias, dark patterns, and how this is all part of digital technology nowadays. And we realized it was an amazing opportunity to work on a project together and we started developing the idea. We always discuss my artistic project, but we got interested in really collaborating this time and build something together. Well, sadly, he's not here right now. He's putting the kids to bed, but maybe manage to join us later for the questions. Anyway, we quickly focused on creating an experience about how attention has been turned into commodity in so many apps. So we decided to make an app. Can you please put the next slide, please? So what you can see on the slides are like images of that app. An app that would be enticing and drawing you in, but also, as you see it, an experience that would get more meta, that would make you think about being somehow manipulated into playing, into using the app. We developed the interaction and the narrative and work on the visual identity as well. And we wanted something that used the swiping interaction, something that pulled from the endless scroll from so many apps that we use on a daily basis. So I was also interested in the swipe as a simple interaction that allowed the viewer to control the pace of the image, another sort of interactive editing, like as my background is in film. And we created a narrative around the conversation between yourself, the viewer, and a habit or a behavior. And we made it so the behavior is like talking directly to you, imploring and manipulating you into making more space in your life for it. Can you please move on to the next slide? To further this, we wanted something really like visceral, something that talks directly to you, something that would make you feel authentic and personal. So we used ASMR sounds to get this intimate feel in the voice, talking directly to you, and it's very, very close to you. And we experienced with lots of organic materials for the visuals, so like fur, like you said, and using paint and fingerprints to reinforce the swiping interaction. Maybe you can put the next slide. We also really wanted to play with the phone that we manipulate every day as an object, and that you are constantly reminded of that fact as you kind of playing with this app. So like you said, there's, like you saw, there's fingerprint, or it looks like the screen is broken and things like that. We built a prototype simply using PowerPoint, and we realized it worked quite well. So we kept iterating, adding and removing ideas and improving the prototype over the last year, showing it to people, bouncing ideas and keeping what worked best for an idea. And maybe you can put the last slide. And in the end, we didn't need to make an app really, because it's hard to believe, but the PowerPoint worked really well. And we wouldn't want an app to work any differently. We might still do it later on, but it's a very good prototype. So anyone can now get it on the link. You just need to install PowerPoint, which is free, and then you can download it and experience it in your own pace, in your own space. The best is just to use a phone or a tablet and a set of headphones, and I hope you enjoy the experience.
Thank you, Anna-Laure. And now we're going to move on to John.
Hi. So what I'm going to talk about, hang on a minute. I will control it myself, if that's okay. So what I'm going to talk about is an interactive installation that I've developed for the Space Residency. So the interactive installation consists of a computer running a machine learning algorithm which is being cooled by a tank of water in which live gutweed is growing. It uses an EEG headset to allow people to interact with the installation. Brainwaves are used to seed a call to a machine learning model that generates an original image for each person. At the heart of the piece is the tank. The tank contains water that is cooling a computer system suspended above it. Gutweed, originally gathered from the Limehouse foreshore, is growing in the tank. There's an interesting ecosystem in which the salt and impurities in the water threaten to corrode and destroy the computer. So there is an exchange of heat, but also subtle chemical reactions occurring in the relationship between the different elements of the piece. And it's always kind of on the edge of collapse. The computer will gradually decay and corrupt as more and more people use it. And also it's been interesting trying to keep the gutweed alive as well. So
John?
yeah, I'm here. I just had trouble switching the slide. The computer is connected to a machine learning model called StyleGAN2, which I've been retraining on over 1,000 images of parts of the body photographed on the Limehouse foreshore. So 1,000 images of things like hands and feet and toes and legs and hair, kind of in different locations on the Limehouse foreshore. And these have been used to train the machine learning model to produce its own original interpretations of these landscapes and bodies on these landscapes. The Limehouse foreshore is just below the towers of Canary Wharf, and it's only visible at low tide. So only twice a day can you actually get down to the foreshore. The rest of the time, it is covered by the Thames. So it's a very ephemeral space, just appearing and disappearing. The location is important as it brings together multiple conflicting systems, from the tidal patterns of the Thames to the wave patterns of algorithmic stock market trading. My installation is intended to bring together these varied conflicting systems and representations. So viewers of the system are encouraged to interact by wearing an EEG headset. The EEG headset reads the electrical activity of the brain, enabling the system to calculate the concentration levels of the viewer. So if you look at the slides, it provides the delta, theta, and alpha waves that the brain produces. And from that, you can calculate the attention levels or the meditation levels of the wearer. So in the installation, I'm using the data gathered from these electrical signals, the electrical activity of the brain, to send data to the machine learning model, to seed the model. And the machine learning model uses this brain data to produce images unique to each viewer. So each person's brainwaves will be turned into data, which is then sent to the machine learning algorithm, which will produce these different generative images based on the data set that I created from the Limehouse foreshore. And the less the viewer concentrates, so the more kind of relaxed they get, the more focused the images become. So it encourages a a kind of meditative form of viewing. So, in conclusion, the installation brings together multiple systems into conversation, including physical live elements from the foreshore, the brainwaves of the viewers, and the representations generated by the StyleGAN2 machine learning algorithm. So I'll leave it there and you can ask questions there. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you, John. Okay, and we're going to move on to Mina now.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Mina.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I'm an artist from Helsinki who was at the Space Studios at the residency during fall 2019. And during my my earlier work has involved a lot of thinking about how visual information affects our lives. And I also worked with a lot of installation and interactive kind of gadgety work dealing with these questions, and also interdisciplinary collaborations with scientists and things. And lately, though, I've moved those issues more into the work, making films about. So it's kind of an indirect way of looking at these questions. And recently, so I made a film about Mars exploration and the way specifically NASA uses imagery and images to do their research, and also to navigate rovers on Mars, for example. And so what I did was I looked through the perspectives of many different people working within these missions, and looking at how they are using the same images for multiple different in very diverse ways. And while I was making that film, I talked to a lot of people, and we had a lot of people helping us over there in Los Angeles. And one person that I met actually led to this work, which is called Photosphere, and we can maybe move to the next slide just for variation. And her name is Sarah Martin. Maybe back one slide, please. Sarah Martin. Oh, okay. And she's a solar scientist or astronomer who has this amazing place, and she helped us to film at this observatory. It's a small observatory that she's a member of, and she helped us to do that. And when we filmed there, I got to know her, and she was just such a fascinating person that I wanted to get back to film her also, and talk to her and interview her in her fantastic, amazing garden with lemon trees and this gigantic solar telescope in the middle of the garden. So I made this short film and installation, which combines film that she herself filmed during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, using 35mm film, and then the films themselves transferred to 16mm, also part of the installation. And then there was also some video or archival film material from the film lab where she had developed the film, because the observatory she was working at, together with her colleague, they actually pioneered. They were pioneers in a way that they established a liaison with the Hollywood film laboratory to actually develop their films, and they had this collaboration going on for years, which I guess many others also did later, but these were apparently the first ones to do that. Otherwise, people like the observatories used to develop their films themselves, and they even had very big laboratories in their facilities. So I became very interested in this kind of overlap between science and film, and how she, who had always been using moving image to understand what's going on a place where we cannot possibly go. I mean, we can possibly go to Mars. It's not very evident, but you cannot never go to the sun. So it's it is always for us a virtual environment, and we cannot also see things changing just by looking through the telescope. So they always need to be able to look at something, not just collect data and things like that. If you want to see a phenomenon change, you really need to film it or take some photographs, because otherwise you don't see the change. Things appear to happen slowly. So you need to speed up the film to see the changes. And so I mean, I was just very interested in this overlap of, and also the way scientists look at images. And this, of course, happens more and more. And it has been kind of a revolution during the last 20 years. Maybe the next slide, I forgot. So this is Sarah Martin. It was just terrific to meet her also and to get to know her science. And I had no idea on what scale her work had been. We were just talking, and I was fascinated by the work she did. But when I was showing my Mars film, at a festival in Czech Republic last year, an astronomer came up to me and asked about her name, which appeared in the credits, and said that, well, she's really known, and she's part of the textbook teaching in solar astronomy. So it was quite fun to notice that actually she was quite much of a pioneer, and also as a female astronomer, quite an odd bird during her own time. So it has been really a pleasure to get to know her work and herself. And so I exhibited this piece in the Solu gallery in Helsinki. It's the BioArt Society's gallery, and this was one of the two works that I was developing during my residency in London. Thank you. Yeah, and here is a table. You can see some of the background research for the work, which was also exhibited in the gallery.
Great, thank you, Mina. And now we're moving on to Thomas.
Hi, thank you, Lucy. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Thomas. Yeah.
Great, cool. So my project started with a research on horticultural therapy, which is the name given to a wide range of treatment programs and exercises that invite participants to interact with elements of the Earth's flora and fauna, with the goal to improve their physical and mental health. Horticultural therapy kind of relies on the biologist Edward Wilson's biophilia theory, which suggests that we have evolved to prefer and appreciate natural environments over concrete-made environments. That all humans have an inherent love of the Earth's flora and fauna, and an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. Edward Wilson believes that natural environments and the exposure to natural elements create a positive psychological and physiological response, such that in nature we're able to recover and restore from daily stresses. The starting point for the development of the work was from a personal interest in exploring horticultural therapy's potential when adapted to virtual reality, and how it could also benefit from virtual reality. So what therapeutic benefits could VR and gaming rituals bring to these activities? The use of digital media and its approach seemed to be at first in kind of contradiction with horticultural therapy's ambition to reconnect with an external natural environment, which was kind of a trigger point for me and a bigger challenge, and grew my interest in making that work. For instance, like which sensorial aspects are missing from VR not being a physical experience, how to overcome these differences. Because of lockdown and being stuck myself inside, I kind of adopted that as a framework too. So with the growing need to create a vast virtual environment to escape to, so I conducted several experiments with processes of digitization, like microscopic photography and 3D modeling, in order to create that environment. Also disrupting physics and exploring new possibilities. The aim was to create a malleable virtual environment that could be altered by each of its visitors, creating a direct interaction with the virtual environment's biomimical elements and feeling of beingness, connection with one world, like digital in that case. This virtual environment would be then accessible via VR headset with hand tracking technology and presented as part of a sculptural installation made of synthetic rocks. The sculptural installation functions a bit like a guidance on how to interact with that virtual environment. The synthetic rocks, part of that installation, can be rotated by hand at 360 degrees, revealing some sort of like metal plates and text on top of them, echoing and guiding the game on how to use the gameplay of the VR environment. The video game does not have a beginning nor an end, meaning that a new player would discover the environment where the last player had left it, creating a sort of like three-dimensional exquisite corpse, a kind of collaborative ritual. The work that is currently presented on Space's website is a video iteration of that work, a sort of video poem encapsulating aspects of that wider research. The video work emphasizes particularly a notion of ecology and the impact of small-scale interactions at a bigger scale when repeated over and over, or on its contrary, reduced to nothing. I came to believe that virtual reality and its ease for construction, destruction, and distortion, plus its tools for monitoring and addressability, allow for a more tailored and accessible experience. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Thomas. That's great. And last but not least, Zoanda, over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Zoanda Street. I have been working kind of on the fringes of indie video games for nearly a decade now. And I also have a background in sociology and area studies and history of material cultures and that kind of thing. And the larger long-term goal of my practice at the moment is working towards a kind of video game related way of representing research. I'd like to create essentially interactive ethnographies. I'd like people to be able to go into video game-like worlds and experience the process of not knowing and of being unaccustomed to a kind of alternative way that things could be, and experience how their own subjectivity has to shift and change and adapt in order to function in that environment. And I'm kind of inching towards that grander goal of like making big ethnographic video games really slowly in teeny tiny pieces and savoring what each piece is like. So my current work in progress that's shown on the Space website is a project called Cis Penance. And it's based on a large number of interviews that I've carried out with trans people in the UK about experiences of waiting. And my one of my goals in this project is to use the visual language of a cue to represent that sense of being in wait and to visualize a social structure that's normally kept invisible and only referred to elliptically and about which we never get much data, which is NHS waiting lists for trans healthcare. But the content of the interviews actually covers many other types of waiting, some of them institutionally enforced, and some of them are an expression of people's autonomy and their actual needs. So I'm kind of using the spatial language of a cue to express something thematic that comes out in the research material. I think we could go on to the next slide. So what my initial goal with the space residency was actually to not work on the digital online version of this project, but to work on the physical installation version. So one of the directions that my practice has taken in the last couple of years has been incorporating more and more textiles into the way that I install games that I've made, and generally to make custom interfaces that are more tactile and that use the physicality of touch and the way that the body interfaces with the device as part of the language of how the video game is expressing something. And so my ultimate goal for the installation of Cis Penance is to have what's essentially going to be a cyber twee queer Bayer tapestry. I want to use beadwork embroidery with LEDs and soft circuitry to create a really large embroidered piece that includes the ability to touch the textile itself as the method of interaction. For a couple of reasons, that's not been a good thing to focus on during COVID. Part of it is I don't know exactly when it will be safe to install something in a shared physical social space that everybody gets their grubby hands all over. And part of it is also that during the conditions that we've been in over the past year, the best way of finding an audience and keeping a conversation going about the issues that this piece tries to highlight has been to have something online and digital. So that's been my focus, and most of my energies have gone into the web version of this. But I was able, thanks to the residency with Space Studios, to start doing some of this experimenting with soft circuitry and beadwork embroidery and LEDs. Next slide. So at the core of the interactions that I designed Cis Penance around, and also my previous project, which was based on interviews with people in Japan, is the idea of a simulated conversation. I think the bottom of this image might be cropped off. That's probably that might be down to the way that I sent the image, actually. What the way that these conversations are laid out is that there's a character in the middle and there's two dialogue option buttons at the bottom. Oh, there we are. We can see them. That's great. So the buttons at the bottom give you options for questions that you can ask the character, and the answers that come back are shown in text at the top. And that text at the top comes directly from a real interview with a real person. And a big part of what I'm doing with this is I'm in dialogue with a conversation that's been happening for a few years around video games and more recently in VR about empathy and digital media as being about kind of being an avatar that is actually somebody else, right? Getting the experience of walking in somebody else's shoes by experiencing a simulated version of their embodiment and also some of the problems that they face in day-to-day life. And I think I don't have time to go into it right now, but I think there's serious limitations to that way of viewing empathy, with implications for how we think about a lot of other issues that are quite disturbing, such as neurodiversity. And what I'm really interested in is how we can be responsible in the subject position that we find ourselves in day-to-day life. Rather than taking a vacation in somebody else's subject position, I want us to handle these difficult issues from the position that we're in and think about the actual consequences of our actions in the moment. And I think that's where I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, so many fascinating threads across all of these amazing projects that this group of artists have been working on, like from technology generally as inspiration versus something to subvert, how to make the invisible visible and tangible. Things like our increasingly entangled existence with landscapes and experiences which are made up of humans, machines, and kind of living organisms, but also the role that virtual reality and synthetic renderings of nature can have as therapy, and textual textile interfaces as a way of kind of embodying the experiences that and concepts being addressed in artwork. So and that's just a few of the threads, but I want to pick up now on a couple, well, three actually, general questions, which I'm going to pose to different members of the panel, and then we can get a little bit more into the details. So the first question is for Thomas and Anna-Laure to start with, and that is, how have games or gamification techniques inspired your work? And Thomas, do you want to start with this?
Sure. I mean, gamification techniques. So, I mean, in my case, I was particularly interested in studying how agriculture and farming were represented and translated to video games, and for what means. For instance, if we look at the really popular video game called Happy Farm, farming is kind of a prop for social engagement, and in Farming Simulator, it is there to reproduce a kind of risk-free and more accessible reality. Or in Minecraft, it's to catalyze creativity, and Age of Empires, it's a form of like empowerment, for instance. And for my work, I was kind of willing to explore how agriculture and the act of what is called grinding in video games, which is the act of conducting repetitive tasks to reach new levels of video gameplay, can be used for therapeutic means. And in my case, grinding consisting of scraping and piling rocks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, using those kind of repetitive structures for something that actually can be therapeutic, not just addictive, as it were. Anna-Laure, do you want to pick up on this question?
Yeah, I guess gamification has a lot to do with behavioral design, as it is a set of techniques to influence behavior. But in a project, we didn't use like score or badges or anything like that. But we wanted it to be very playful, something very playful, and we used reinforcement all along the piece. And it does start with a playful interaction that I'm not going to reveal now, to kind of initiate the relationship you have with this habit of behavior. And we also use a lot of reinforcement, like clicker or repetition, or some sort of like reward or positive moment within the experience. So I guess, yeah, that was very much like at the core of a project.
Thank you. And I wondered actually, Loyanda, if you wanted to come in on this as well. yeah, given obviously you work a lot at that in that indie games kind of zone of things as well, and to pick up on the question a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about what you do with player agency and what the affordances of a virtual space kind of say as a form of like what some people call procedural rhetoric. It's funny, I kind of come from, I guess, an area that is in a critical relationship with the games industry and other bits of industry that use games. Because it has this critical relationship to it, the word gamification it's a 4-letter word for us, and it often represents a way of using motivation systems to try and put a sticking plaster over problems that are really about alienation of labor under capitalism. And for people who see games as an expressive medium, that seems like a perverted misuse of it. I think also we do have to accept that the medium that we're working with comes from quite a toxic industry itself, and the way to address that isn't to purify it by going, well, what I do is not gamification. I do something that's beautiful and pure, and gamification is tainted and awful. But to see that everything is built out of the same garbage society that everything else is from, and appreciate what we can do with it that's creative and interesting.
Yeah, really, really well put. And that, like you say, can enable that sense of agency as well. And does anyone else want to pick up on this? Any of the points that have been raised by Zayanda and Thomas and Anna-Laure? Okay, I'm gonna move on then to the next question. So we're in this little Mozilla Hubs space, all in different guises in our avatars, and as our online and offline existence is increasingly blurring, virtual simulations are increasingly becoming spatialized, identities blur into avatars, and so on. I wanted to ask, what are the exciting creative opportunities that this presents? I can think of some kind of scarier sides to the dimension of this in terms of, surveillance, data collection, things like that. But also there are, what are the creative opportunities you're excited about? And I was interested to pose that question to John and to Daria and Harry James in the first instance. So,
I'm happy to go.
Great.
I'll perhaps start from a slightly negative position before coming to a positive. So I first got involved in art in the 90s, kind of internet art scene. And in the 90s, there was a lot of utopian discourse about the possibilities of the virtual as a space for fluid identity. With the ultimate fantasy of escaping the kind of moist, fleshy realities of the physical body. And although we've all been drawn into the virtual through this kind of pandemic situation, I don't think we should repeat these mistakes of trying to see the virtual as somehow separate from the physical. What the last year has taught me, and I'm especially thinking of the Black Lives Matter movement or the appalling backlash we've seen about trans rights and the continued struggle for the equality of women, is that real physical bodies are at the forefront of political struggle. So I think this is only going to intensify as machine learning with all its biases is more widely introduced into everyday life. So that's the kind of negative vision that I've got. But rather than looking at the virtual as an escape from physicality, I think we should think of it as an experimental space where we can develop alternative narratives and test out speculative futures that can help us advance environmental and social justice in the offline space, in the physical space of the world. Sorry, that's my bit of a rant answer.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute then. That's great, thank you. And yeah, Daria and Perry James.
Yeah, I think what interests me most at the moment is thinking more on the positive side of like what other avatars can exist in this space that are non-human, either material or other species, and where that can be taken. I think that really interests me as an artist, and how this merging of the online and offline can come into this world, and how it influences that world in some way. So yeah, our ability to be online now, but I don't know if something like this was in another games engine like Unreal, and everybody who was an avatar in this space was linked to a remote server. Like there's so much physical kind of pollution or energy going into this space as well that comes back into the physical world. And I think that interests me in being critical about that, but also using it in tactical ways that can bring other parts of our environment and ecosystem together that isn't just human-centered.
Yeah, and would anyone else like to add to that?
I would maybe quickly also add. Yeah, I think also, I mean, your question was about virtual spatial simulations, and it's always a simulation from something that we know, so it's somehow always linked to the real world. And I think that's still exciting, because I think on the one hand, actually, like being in, for example, this Mozilla Hubs environment, or generally working in virtual environments, like really gives me the space to reflect and meditate about essential elements such as movement that we take for granted, but actually if you build it from scratch in a software, it's really hard. Same as physics that every space has. And again, we are actually inspired by real world physics and try to imitate it, but actually this is all very complex and very hard. And I think those spaces on the one hand allow us to experiment, how John said it, but also to really reflect actually about essential elements, yeah, that makes us human.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things coming up which I thought if we had time we could touch on later as well, but maybe other people on the panel might want to add to that as well. These points about the body, and the body being the physical body kind of being at the forefront, but also this entanglement between and machines and living organisms on this planet, or any other that anyone would want to add beyond what I've said.
Sorry,
Nina, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to comment, because actually what Soyander said earlier, and now somebody was also mentioning the Unreal Engine, and because back in the 90s, I was studying in actually in the university that created the internet, and we did a lot of experiments with all kinds of virtual worlds and things like that, and then we used both like worlds like the VRML and also some really kind of from ground level small programs that had been written in that university. So some of the programs we used were really kind of open, and people did things from a very basic level, but it was kind of very difficult, but at the same time very open, so you could do things, really different things. And now I haven't been involved in this world at all for a really long time, but I just remember that when we did one project in Unreal Engine back in '99, there was there was this problem that that model, because we wanted to make something completely different than a first-person shooter game. So we wanted to make something that where you were actually creating something and creating, adding something into the world, giving the people possibility to create something instead of the opposite. So we just noticed that in the code, within the kind of the code of the program, was built in all these possibilities to destroy things, and that was basically in the model of the core program. So it was much easier to do something and then just destroy it. And so I think it invited to that kind of interaction, to have something that you destroy rather than build from something, and that seemed a lot more complicated to think in terms of creating rather than destroying. Maybe it's self-evident, but I just thought of this observation.
No, one thing I wonder with it as well is how much is it changing and broadening out now that making games and using games engines, whether it's actually for games or other, it could be a performance or discussion or event or another kind of simulation, whether that is facilitating this kind of broader exploration and experimentation with like the tools and dynamics that are on offer in Unreal Engine.
Yeah, I hope so.
The other platform. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything?
I wouldn't mind jumping in on that if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely.
The things that are built into game engines that claim to be kind of these universal, all-round, very powerful engines is really interesting to dig into. And yeah, there's this supremacy of like collision systems more broadly that really shapes what we're used to seeing in video games. The idea that the main whether it's a shooter or a platformer or most other genres, the main thing that you're concerned about, particularly in a game that's spatial, like 3D space or 2D space, is objects colliding with other objects and things getting destroyed or changed as a result. And it's been a really interesting challenge for designers in the last several years to think, well, how do I do something different with that? And there's this broader issue of where do the resources in the industry go? Like, what kind of engine is it profitable to build for other game developers? And there's a long history of experiments in very different kinds of engines and game systems kind of being tried out a little bit and then dying out because it's very difficult to commercialize that within the structures that fund most of the industry. And it's a huge area that I think the arts sector could intervene in productively. I've just been Googling trying to remember the name of the thing, and I don't remember what it was. It was many years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, definitely more than 10, around 15 years ago, I think. There was a remarkable experiment into a 3D game engine that was all about conversation agents. And this really strange, uncanny experience of experiencing a story where you go and talk to your neighbors, and you can choose, you don't just have dialogue options, but you can kind of try all kinds of different ways of communicating with them, including using body language and proximity, and they're programmed to respond in all of these different ways to the ways that you occupy space socially. And it was a fascinating direction for something to take, although it was really awkward and strange and uncanny and glitchy. And you can see all of these lost possibilities in experimental projects in games that haven't received the support that they needed to really flourish.
Yeah, there's so much to pick up on there, I think, around the economics of these things and the funding and the support for them as well. But I also just wonder on that point you just made there about those, that the those uncanny interactions. And I just wondered if, Thomas, you might want to pick up on anything there, having worked on your project, where what kind of animation, like, could you see, maybe could you go further with the stones, or how does this come into it? I wonder if that makes any sense.
About the animation? What do you mean there?
About the possibilities, I guess, for interaction that you can see, so or how you've explored that as well with what you've done with your project with the stones and the building of the stones and the.
Yeah, I guess I might relate to something that's been said before, but maybe this idea of like physics and how these like processes could be actually altered, and it's not necessarily just a mimicry of reality, but can actually be extended. And I think this is what I've tried to explore. I don't think I have an answer to whether this has been successfully achieved or not, but I think I was kind of interested in the ways in which like video games can actually enable other therapeutical purposes. But in my case, like it was based on an existing exercise that asked people to collect stones and attribute each of these stones like a problem of their life. And by finding the balance between each of these stones, then they will kind of like find a solution or be appeased with the problem that they assigned to that stone. And then, so my direct translation from that exercise wasn't just to create a direct translation, the exact same process, because I was limited in the ways that when you basically, even though it's using hand tracking, if you actually try to find balance between two stones, you're lacking so much information about the stone's physics. For instance, like its weight and its shape and its surface. So the video game became more about the kind of rearrangement of an environment, and then exploring how through digital media we can access a kind of a vast environment and create space, literally space. Yeah. Not sure if that answers your question, but
No,
that
it
was
does. Thank you, and apologies for the very vague question as well. I think that point about altering rather than mimicking reality is also really key here and across different works that you've all been developing in this residency. And actually, I'm just aware of the time. It's 20 to 8, and so I'm just wondering, Christina, whether there were any particular questions, comments coming in from YouTube at the moment, whether now might be a moment to pick up on some of them.
Yes, yes, thanks, Lucy. So currently we have comments. We have some lovely comments about everyone's work, especially about John in particular, and his opinion. Well, he's rightly so comments on like the current situation with how technology is being used or misused. I wanted to pose a question to the whole panel, if I may, and I wanted to ask everyone about how they feel in terms, well, how they feel about the aspects of touch right now. I know that a lot of your works are about touch, but also they're about like touching something virtual, or touching someone's life, or actually not being able to touch anything because, well, in Mina's case, it's the sun, so we can't touch it. So I wanted to ask how everyone feels about kind of going digital, being in this virtual room. Does touch play a role in your work at this point, or have you been inspired to think about touch in any way? Thank you.
I will come in with some unthought out comments. I mean, making my work was really interesting because it was almost a relief from the constant Zoom meetings that I've been forced to be in at work, etc. Because I situated my piece at the Limehouse foreshore, going down there at specific times when there was a low tide, and obviously the photographs that I took, or the photographs that were also taken of me, involved kind of taking my shoes off and standing in mud or being in water or touching the gutweed or the seaweed, etc. And in many ways, I think that's kind of been an escape from the virtual. And I think that's kind of important, really, that we do kind of touch the earth without sounding too much like a hippie.
Maybe I can comment. Hello?
Yeah, Mina, go for it.
Yes, I was thinking of, just how we perceive images versus virtual environments, and how also things are just merging more and more. This idea of what is a drawing or what is a photograph, what is, you also create virtual 3D environments based on photographs as well, and introducing sound and kind of haptic elements. Then it becomes more and more kind of, in a way, it's supposed to trying to create a physical environment. But when we think of how images and everything is, there's a lot of what I've tried to in my film, especially in the Mars film, but also in the solar film about the solar astronomer, touch upon is that how, despite they are kind of immaterial, they appear immaterial for us. If we look at the work behind every image, it's extremely material, and of course the end result is in a way imaginary, somehow, but and only visual, but there's so much else connected to it that is just very material and very much about creating all this machinery to make it happen. And so there's all these sides to the immaterial image that aren't so immaterial in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of the moment in your film where the scientist, sorry, I've forgotten her name, is, like setting up the telescope and with the tissues cleaning each mirror in this very particular way, and the way you capture the sound of it as well. I think it really, accentuated that.
Yes.
Anyone else want to comment on touch? I mean, Zoyander, you've been thinking about textiles and how you incorporate those into the experience of your game-like interactions. And I wondered if you could comment on that a bit more. I know that's something you've also been doing for a while. And
I guess a big part of that is the critiquing the way that I imagine what the digital is. Like, I guess there's a sort of mystification that happens when I focus on the digital as being virtual, and when I only focus on what's being simulated within the software, because what's also happening is this physical interaction with an interface. And so I've been thinking about how that physical interaction can be used creatively, and also in a way that welcomes people in who are turned off by things that are primarily digital. So I had this experience of installing some work that I'd done that was still primarily just shown on computers. But I'd commissioned a large quilt to be shown just above these computers, partly because of there's this history that connects computers to textiles. There's the argument that the first computer was not the Charles Babbage's difference engine, but was in fact the Jacquard loom. And this idea that computers are pattern-making machines first and foremost, and that is intrinsically basically a textile medium. And so maybe computers already share this history with textiles, and we should think of them the way more like the way we think about textile art than the way we think about something like cinema, maybe. It's an interesting provocation. There's an essay by Emily Reed about that I really like. So I'd been thinking about that a lot, and what I found was that like showing this textile piece above the computers kind of drew people in who would then have to contend with the social awkwardness of having come closer to the art because they think that it's their kind of thing and that they might like it, and then seeing that it's computers and been like, oh God, no, that's not for me, I need to get out now. And it gave me this moment where I could like bring people in and go, no, it's fine. I haven't made video games that you can be good or bad at. I've made something that you just press and explore and you can't get it wrong. This is not going to be embarrassing for you. It's totally fine. Because people feel like anything that's encased within a computer is going to make them feel foolish in some way. And I don't think people feel that way about textiles. Sorry, that wasn't really an answer about touch. I got a bit diverted there. I'm going to stop talking.
No, I think it's totally related because, you know, what draws someone in? Well, texture, touch, like, you know, it's kind of intuitive as well, right? How you perceive something and whether it's welcoming or not. So actually, I think the surfaces and that kind of thing, they are important. I guess expanding it a bit out, I wonder, Daria and Perry, whether you might comment on this in terms of like immersivity and what you've been exploring in terms of like that. You mentioned when you were talking early on about making the NO2 gases that we're releasing into the atmosphere something that can be kind of walkable, you know, making them something tangible. And I wondered if you could, maybe expand on that a little bit more and the importance of immersivity in its different forms, I guess, and guys in your work.
Yeah, I think like we've tried to be critical about like our work and like missing out on kind of using haptics in any way, especially like the use of like augmented and mixed reality, how it's very focused on audio visual outcomes, and how can we think about it with a bit more inclusivity and using haptics. So around the technologies that we've been using, thinking about how like the Kinect camera allows you to, if you have multiple cameras, it allows you to spatially map a room, but with a phone and code and depth map, there may be less ability to do this. And the ability to like incorporate haptics with a mobile phone into augmented reality experiences is quite difficult, and we haven't seen much of it.
Yeah, but I think obviously there are like different kinds of immersion, and you've got like, I don't know, installations which would maybe fit into the category of immersion. But for example, when I've just seen Zoyanda's image earlier from this little tactile sculpture that he built in the beginning of the residency, I was like taken by that. And I think right now, from not having visited any exhibitions in so long, I think going actually into an exhibition space and seeing, for example, this little tactile element from Zoyanda, I think that at the moment would be such an immersion for me. So that would be almost like enough of like entertainment and just going there. So I think it's really about, I think it's, it really depends on the mindset. Like, I think because we were in this lockdown for so long, actually, like any other experience than just a 2D experience on the screen is actually already so tactile for me at this point in time, I would say. So I think this is just answering your the tactile and touch question from earlier that I wanted to get on. But yeah, as Perry said, we currently try to actually experiment with different spatial interactions, and also, as he said, how could we expand this through a phone, for example? And yeah, let's see where this leads us. But summarize, I would love to see Zoyanda's piece in real life and not only on the screen. So yeah.
Same here. Does anyone want to add to it? Pick up on anything? I mean, Anna-Laure, you mentioned how actually this is taking a slightly different direction, but you know, you've been working kind of in a very simple, if we're thinking of like that point about accessibility and what's welcoming, and your approach with your app, and both the use of, you know, something simple, relatively simple like PowerPoint, and that kind of the actions and the feelings you were looking to invoke.
Yeah, in the app we really invoke this idea of touching or feeling something, I guess. In a way, to be touched or touch issue, something like that, is also linked to an emotional sort of state. And I think it's important when you're developing kind of a relation. So we kind of play with that in a way. And I think we were very interested in this idea of touching and not really touching at the same time as touching the screen, but we've shown lots of texture. But thinking that maybe it goes back to also you being there with that piece, thinking about your body, manipulating this app, this kind of screen, this virtual space. So this relation between you physically playing with this and being, and slowly, I mean, as you kind of interacting with the piece, you have to realize that you actually spending a lot of time doing that. You keep on swiping, you are playing with the rhythm, and you have to kind of make your own decision where to stop and where to take that. So it's kind of always this kind of idea as well of like how much of your attention you spend on the virtual screen, and when do you kind of leave it and be fully your body again in a way.
Thank you, Anna-Laure. And Christina has just said that there is a question that's been put on YouTube. So yeah.
Yes. So yes, I have a question from Chloe, and she's saying thank you all. And in Zoyander's speaking of textiles, particularly quilting, are there any thoughts about bringing the digital into the physical in a collaborative way with feedback relationships?
That's an interesting question, and the mention of quilting makes me imagine this is partly like drawing on traditions of, oh my god, patchworking, where you have this collaborative way of making, and that's not something that I've had the chance to explore very much. It was going to be part of my plan for this residency before COVID. There was going to be more collaborative, at least skill sharing, getting people together to sew things together. But yeah, I don't know exactly what Chloe is imagining in the question, but it brings to my mind the possibilities of both sewing things in the same space, but also stitching different people's elements together and maybe joining them together in some sort of circuit. Sorry, something else on my computer is yelling at me right now. I think it's a really interesting idea, and I have a lot of different thoughts that could go in different directions with it, and it's not something I've had a lot of opportunity to explore yet, so thank you.
Anyone else would like to add to this and build on it? Christina, did you have any further comments about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, Thomas's work, which is the a VR work of stacking stones, in a way, I think that Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that your work is done in a way of an exquisite corpse sort of style. So when people pick up something, others can finish it off, and it kind of it becomes this constant change and constant kind of picking up from where the last person had left the stones in the virtual space. So would you like to maybe comment a little bit on, maybe your work relates to Chloe's question on, collaborative way and feedback relationships?
Yeah, I think the question was also about if there could be like a feedback with the actual materialization, or I guess with a VR headset it's quite direct. But the way I conceive the installation, it's not represented in the video because unfortunately the video is just iteration of the actual installation. But the installation would be conceived in a way that there's only one VR headset. On one side of the installation, it looks a bit like a big crane holding a VR headset, and on the other side it would be a screen actually monitoring what is being done in a VR game from a bird's eye view. So because only displaying one VR headset, it's not a multiplayer game in a simultaneous sense, but it's really one after the other. So it forces people to take the time to watch what's going on the screen from this bird's eye view, which would only display big rocks being actually moved around, and then enter the VR headset one after the other. So I was kind of like interested in the ways in which this installation would be a bit like a queuing system. So I don't know if you go to theme parks like Disneyland, for instance, when you queue in these like undergrounds or kind of like world built, you always like confronted to this kind of fake environment. Or it could also be at a water park, you have always these kind of like fiberglass rocks or like terrains. So I was trying to mimic a bit of that kind of aesthetic, because I think it echoes really well in the collective knowledge what to do with that. So there's not a direct interaction with the rock and the rock in the installation, the one that you see in the video made of fiberglass. There's no direct interaction. There's no responsive aspect to the rock and the video game, but it's more into creating an experience from the moment of like putting the headset on. So it's like creating a transition, a smooth transition from the physical space to the virtual space.
Thank you. And I'm just aware of the time. We're pushing towards 8 o'clock, and so I think I need to hand over to Christina to wrap up and let you know about a few things that are coming up. But firstly, I just wanted to thank all the artists who took part in this conversation and shared insights into your work and your thinking. It's been super interesting. And yeah, thank you very much for that. And I'll hand over to Christina.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lucy. And thank you to all the artists. You were absolutely amazing. And thank you for the brilliant thought-inspiring, thought-provoking discussion that we just had in the presentations as well. I'm just going to switch on my camera very quickly so that you can see my little face again. So yes, thank you so much everyone for joining us for this panel discussion. I really appreciate your kindness and patience with us, and I do apologize about the technical difficulties towards the beginning of this talk. I would like to say that yes, there will be a recorded session with all the audio working fine, so we will be sharing this with you as soon as we have completed our closed captions, because we would like to, you know, share this video and make it as accessible as possible. I want to say to the artists, it was an absolute pleasure to actually share a space with you all, albeit a virtual one. It was just really lovely to see everyone in one place and not see, I guess, different camera views in different rooms, because this, at least in my opinion, this virtual space brings us, albeit in a virtual way, but all our avatars closer together. So it's been really lovely to see you all on stage and to see you all interacting with the presentations, with Lucy, with each other, and to be able to kind of share your experiences from the residency as well as your research. I would like to ask Lania to come a bit closer to me. So Lania, our amazing assistant producer, who has been operating the comments and also supporting the program throughout, is also here with us. There she is. Amazing. Thank you, Lania. If you want to, you can go to the stage so that we can see you all. We can see you on stage as well. What was I going to say? So yes, I want to end with asking you to please visit the Deep Play Showcase, which we have shared in the comment box. And please have a stroll or a scroll through these artists' brilliant research and work. I would also like to thank the Arts Council England and the Sasta Moyan Foundation for their kind support for the Art and Tech program at Space. And I also want to thank former Art and Tech artist and creative technologist Clarice Hilton for building this room for us. Clarice, thank you so much. I think the room looks stunning. Yes, that's all, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the event. We will be coming back with another live event on the 19th of March, when we will be closing the showcase, as in we will be celebrating the end of the showcase with an algorave in this room as well, via a live broadcast. So without further ado, thank you so much, everyone. I'm wishing you a lovely rest of the evening and hope to see you all very, very soon. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.